This is the fastest that change has been occurred in human history. We live in an attention deficit democracy. We have to re-engage people in caring about their government. Jefferson famously said, if you want a people that are both ignorant and free, you want something that never has been and never will be. But if you also look at history, the heroism of human beings, there's always a basis for hope.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the California Future Society podcast. This week, I have a great one for you. It's Rick Cole, who's one of the experts on city government and city management, probably in the entire state. He has nearly 4 decades of experience as a senior executive in cities across Southern California, and we talk about a number of pressing issues. For example, why LA is facing nearly $1 billion budget shortfall, which is something his office predicted 2 years ago. We talk about why city management matters to the average Californian. We talk about why, in his opinion, LA is squandering its opportunity to make the most of the 2028 Olympics. We also talk about whether or not California is at a turning point and what gives him hope for the future of the state. I know you're going to love it. If you're anyone who cares about cities, city management, the future of California, there's something in this conversation for you. As always, the best way to follow these conversations is to subscribe wherever you're listening to this, or to subscribe at californiafuturesociety.com. With that, here's Rick. Rick, so excited to talk to you today. You are someone I think uniquely positioned to speak about the state of local government, where it's heading. You have such a rich career and history in local government in Southern California. So for people who don't know you, can you just introduce yourself? And then also, what's your connection to California is how I like to start these conversations.
Well, I grew up here in Pasadena, my hometown, and had the honor of a lifetime of being mayor of your hometown. I got involved as a youngster because Pasadena went through the integration of our segregated schools when I was in high school. And that thrust me into activism because the city council and school board didn't handle that crisis very well. And so young people had to step forward, and I was one of those that got involved. And I served later on the city council. I got elected at 29. And after 12 years on the city council, including a term as mayor, I embarked upon a career in city management, which is an unusual path. Most elected officials don't become executives, and vice versa. Now I have been an elected official, a local government executive as the city manager of first Azusa for 6 years, then Ventura for 9 years, then Santa Monica for 5 years. And in between, I did 2 years as deputy mayor in charge of the budget in Los Angeles. Now I'm back in the city of Los Angeles as the chief deputy controller. And then last fall, I was elected, or actually last spring, excuse me, I was elected to the Pasadena City Council again after an absence of 29 years. So I've spent almost 40 years in local government here in California in a variety of roles as a commissioner, as a council member, as a mayor, and as a senior executive.
And now, to anyone who doesn't really follow their local news or may not be familiar with local budgeting, I know you've touched on a lot of different issues over your career, but budgeting has been one of the main themes. Why do city budgets matter so much for the future of our cities and for the future of California? And what do most people misunderstand about how their cities are funded and managed?
Well, to the first part of the question, there was a famous bank robber in the Depression named Willie Sutton, and reporters asked him why he kept robbing banks, and he said because that's where the money is. So I learned very quickly as an elected council member, you can make speeches, you can pass motions, you can even pass laws, and none of it really matters unless there are staff members and dollars allocated to actually implement what you come up with in your speeches and your ordinances and your policies. And so the budget is both critical to the allocation of resources that affect you literally when you walk out your front door, right? The sidewalk, the streets, the street lights, the police, the fire, the libraries, the parks, but also it matters not just in terms of the allocation of resources amongst all of those things and the taxes you pay, but also it has to do really with what your values are. What do you find most important? For some people, that's public safety. For other people, maybe in a different place on the Maslow's hierarchy, it's having the greenery, and for other people, it's equity and justice. But how you allocate your dollars is a reflection of your values as a community. And so I learned very quickly as a council member to pay attention to where a city spends its money. On the second question, which is what most people misunderstand, they misunderstand that the budgeting is a row of very intimidating numbers, right? Line items and thick, impenetrable books that cause people who are not particularly numerate uh, to to um, to their eyes to glaze over and to think this is way too complicated for me to ever fully understand. And I think that's just wrong. I got a great experience as a brand new council member asking impertinent questions of the staff. They decided that it was better to educate me than to stonewall me. And so they sent me literally to a class called Finance for the Non-Finance Executive. And I learned how to read a profit and loss statement, learned how to read a balance sheet, learned how to understand fund accounting in 5 days, right? Once over, fairly superficial introduction to the world of numbers and budgeting and accounting. But it's not as impenetrable as it seems. And my mantra as a senior executive always was, it's not the numbers that count. It's what you do with the numbers that counts. And I teach a boot camp to new Latino elected officials through the National Association of Latino Elected Officials um, to basically demystify budgeting for folks and to help them as lay people understand municipal budgeting and utilize that knowledge as power to actually help shape the future trajectory of their community and to serve their residents.
I want to dig into LA's budget. You're talking about budgets reflecting values. And right now, there is a deficit that your team's been talking about. The mayor announced that layoffs are looming. Can you talk about what's at stake for LA's budget in the near future and these tough decisions? And also, how does this deficit compare to other deficits that you've seen cities weather across your nearly 4 decades?
Let me start with what does it mean for Los Angeles? For Los Angeles and its 4 million residents, but also for the 10 million people who live in the county, including those 4 million who live in the city. All of us are affected. The city of Los Angeles is the economic engine of our region. It has the airport, it has the port, at least one of the two ports, and it's critical to the future of all of Southern California. And we stand at a nearly $1 billion shortfall that's structural in nature. It's not just a one-time uh, blip caused by a pandemic or caused by a recession. The city has been on a path of spending more money than it's taking in. And we started warning about this in January of 2023. So more than 2 years ago, and we pinpointed 4 of the 5 reasons. The one we didn't anticipate was the devastating fire that hit us in January. But we did, among our warnings, talk about the increased likelihood of climate-related disasters. We didn't know it would take the form it did, but clearly you could see that we're having more major disasters that are climate related, whether they're droughts or fires or floods. The other that we pinpointed was that the economy, which had bounced back from COVID, wasn't going to continue to rise at the same pace. It just, the law of gravity and economics meant that there would be a flattening and a plateauing of that increase in revenue. We were ignored, and people assumed that the economy was going to continue to roar upward. And so they padded the budget based upon overly optimistic revenue projections. The second thing we warned about was the systemic um, uh, under budgeting of some of our expenses, including what is now soaring liability payouts that the city is encountering. We also talked about the way in which infrastructure, the lack of investment in our basic infrastructure, and that, that's a word that causes people again their eyes to glaze over. But that's the streets you drive on, that's the sidewalks you walk on, um, that's the pipes that bring you water, that's the wires that bring you electricity, that's the bridges that carry you over rivers. That infrastructure is absolutely basic to our quality of life and our standard of living. And Los Angeles, like so many other California cities, has neglected that in recent years. And at some point, things begin to break, and then you have much greater costs to replace or repair something than if you'd simply maintained it over the years. And then we said, look, there's going to be uh, negotiations with all of our unions. And in inflationary times, in a pro-union city, there are going to be expectations about significant raises. And so if you add those things together, the potential for climate disasters, the reality that the economy couldn't keep going at the rate it was increasing after COVID, the reality that we have significant accumulation of deferred maintenance, that we were going to have to give our folks some form of raise. And finally, that the COVID bailout money from the federal government was going to run out. You could see that this was coming. Um, Frankly, my boss, Kenneth Mejia, 33 years old, not from government, um, but has a CPA and understands budgets and accounting. Um, he saw what was coming, and we were frankly derided and dismissed. The mayor's communications director said we were relying on theatrical exaggerations and doomsday projections. It actually turned out worse than we predicted, um, because all of the factors that we saw, um, we gave raises we clearly could not afford. $1 billion over 4 years, additional to the police officers, $2 million to the civilians to match what was given to the police officers. Again, $2 billion not of pay, $2 billion more pay over 4 years. And then we had the fires, the economy slowed, the infrastructure bills are coming due, and the federal money is gone. So we're in a
Let's talk through the fires because there's both the material impact on the budget, but then it also strikes me that there's a political impact that at a time when, public safety, both on the fire and on the police side, were played a central role for a lot of individuals who were devastated by these fires, whether in the Palisades or out, north of where you live in Pasadena. Psychologically and politically, you're saying it's already a pro-union town. It's already difficult to enter those negotiations. I imagine it's even more difficult politically. Do you see that factoring into how the choices are made going forward and how the tough political realities are navigated?
Well, that's just an example of something that's built into our politics, Jarrett, and that is the short-term view. We live in an attention deficit democracy, and we tend to lurch from headline to headline, crisis to crisis, soundbite to soundbite, political campaign to political campaign, yearly budget to yearly budget. Um, I think it's really important for us to take a longer view, and not to be reactive always to the latest crisis, the latest scandal, the latest um, eruption from the White House, and to realize that that the long view I'm privileged to have because I've been around a while, and I've seen cycles, and I've seen crises, and I've seen good times and bad times, and and taking the long view and investing is what previous generations were better at. There are a lot of things about previous generations that showed their blind spots and their prejudices, but we are the beneficiaries of major investments uh, in our infrastructure, both the hard stuff, the bridges and the streets and the railroads and the airports and all of that, but also the soft, one of the world's great university systems here in California. Um, what used to be one of the best public school systems in the nation and therefore in the world. Um, the creation of local democracy that had a vibrance that the luster is off today. And again, not to look back on the past with rose-colored glasses. There were homophobia, misogyny, racism, lots of things to fault our past with. But we could learn from the importance of investing in your future, not just with cement, but also ecologically sensitive ways in which we can actually do a better job of living in harmony with our surroundings, particularly in the age of climate change, and taking the long view that nature takes rather than the view we become accustomed to with the immediacy of social media.
I want to pivot to thinking about the long-term future of California, but while we're on this topic of long-term budget thinking, I know pension liability is something that comes up a lot, both at the state and the municipal level. I know it's hard to sometimes even find good quality data on the state of municipal pension liability. Thinking about the long term, that seems like the biggest looming long-term threat from a municipal finance perspective. Can you speak to that about how much should people be concerned about that? Is that something that you lose sleep over, and will that have a negative impact on our cities going forward if we maintain the status quo?
The state embarked upon a major reform in 2011 under Governor Brown, and that staved off the crisis that states like Illinois and Kentucky have faced. Um, with the volatility of the global economy, we may see that one of those four horsemen of the fiscal apocalypse riding again with as the stock market gyrates. When the stock market goes down, the investments that pay for future pension payouts go down as well. Something like $6 trillion were wiped out of wealth globally during the Trump hiccup over tariffs, some of which is sort of come back, but it's all paper money, right? But if there's a serious global shrinkage in the economy, pension debt will again be a huge burden. And what's different this time here in California is the last time we were in part insulated from immediate shocks because they had built in what they called smoothing, where the immediate impacts of decline in investments were not immediately passed on to local governments. The trouble is, if you don't immediately um, pay up, then the miracle of compound interest is working against you. So, one of the reforms that happened post 2011 was to pass on that cost sooner rather than later. So we could see some very heavy blows to local government if the economy continues its downward trajectory. We just got the headlines today that last quarter the economy shrunk. Again, taking the long view, um, no one knows where we're going to be in 2 or 3 years, but there certainly is a high risk and of course, when that happens, when there's a recession, not only do our pension obligations suddenly balloon, but also our need for services to help people who are struggling increases. Not so much at the local level, but the county and the state level that are responsible for unemployment and welfare and what have you. But also, we see a decline in our local revenue. So that's why there's this tremendous volatility, and you can go from the city of Los Angeles just 2 years ago celebrating record high reserves and adopting the mantra of let's hire more people, more cops, more folks to work for the city. And then less than 2 years later, we're facing $1 billion deficit. That gyration is kind of unfortunately built into the system, and it's why it's important to take the long view because crises are almost built into the system. And so creating resilience and creating fiscal sustainability is really important because, maybe we're just lucky being right in January 2023. But I don't think so. I think the reality is that if you're looking carefully at history and the world we live in today, you know that we sit on very fragile economic institutions, and that fragility has never been greater than it is today.
So you talked about these riding these tailwinds, the generational investments of prior decades of California on multiple fronts that you listed. And I part of the reason I started this podcast, my own writing, is feeling like we're in the turning point, particularly in Southern California, around our identity and what Southern California looks like and how we grow. I know one person you overlapped with in Ventura, William Fulton. He wrote this book 20 years ago, The Reluctant Metropolis. One of the themes there is LA has, kind of maximized its horizontal sprawl, sprawling out into the desert, implying kind of a need to think differently about how the city develops and the region develops going forward. And I know that's something you've thought a lot about in your career. Do you agree that we're in a turning point? And what do you see as some of the big decisions and changes that need to be made in how Southern California develops in its land use or any other direction you want to take it?
I think we're at a turning point. That's what I've been articulating here in my role at the city with my boss Kenneth Mejia, but also on my own as a council member, newly elected council member in Pasadena. But I don't see us treating it as a turning point, which means we're more likely to muddle through and initiate what I think is a period of slow and inexorable decline. And exhibit A of that is the failure to capitalize on the coming of the Olympics. Now, not everybody is happy about the Olympics for all kinds of reasons. It's become very corporate and really, like many things in our society, oriented toward the billionaire um, class. But the Olympics really in California, in Los Angeles history, has been a huge opportunity in 1932 and in 1984. And we squandered that opportunity for 2028. We had every opportunity getting these Olympics years ago to build actual legacy improvements to both solve some of our existing problems and invest in future possibilities, so that there would be a lasting legacy after the Olympics. Now we're scrambling madly just to be able to put them on for the benefit of the people who are coming here, mostly on corporate jets, right? And they may not make up the bulk of the attendance, but that seems to be who these games are really oriented to. Uh, and and we had the opportunity to fix homelessness instead of facing the question of where are we going to hide these people for 2 weeks. We had the opportunity to improve our healthcare system, to improve our placemaking throughout Southern California, to improve our transit system. The one thing we did right, which my previous boss, very different from the one I work for now, Eric Garcetti, got right, was we have rebuilt LAX. And by the time the Olympics arrive in 2028, LAX will have been transformed into a sad and outmoded airport into a 21st century air hub, international air hub. So we did that right. Why didn't we do that with every other aspect of the challenges and opportunities we face? We simply were asleep at the wheel. So to your earlier question about, is this a turning point? Yes, it is a potential turning point, but that requires leadership. Now, as to where that comes from, I don't think that comes from a politician necessarily. I don't think that comes from politics and government necessarily. I think that I've always believed that the politics and government rest upon the foundation of civic leadership. And civic leadership is not an elitist thing. Civic leadership is a broad-based um, uh, foundation for a democratic society. Jefferson famously said, if you want a people that are both ignorant and free, you want something that never has been and never will be, right? We don't ask much of citizens today in our community. And when I use the word citizens, I mean people who live here, not their technical adherence to, immigration laws. Um, Citizens are the foundation, to me, of government and politics. And we simply ask of citizens, just vote every 2 years, right? Please, at least vote, right? And unfortunately, because between elections they're not involved in participating, they're then subject to this avalanche of meretricious propaganda and try to sort their way through to vote. Is this person, let's throw out that bastard and throw in this bastard, and which is the lesser of the two evils. That's one of the great things about Kenneth's campaign. Kenneth Mejia, 31-year-old CPA, who had literally not set foot in City Hall except twice, and both times were for protests. Um, and he got more votes than any candidate for any office in the history of Los Angeles. Now, some of that is because he's a fresh, brilliant, honest guy who looked different from the usual politicians that people are sick of. But that's the other side of it, is that people are sort of sick of these poll-tested, inauthentic, cater to the cliches, empty cliches of the moment. We're sick of them, and so we're looking for something that's different and authentic. And Kenneth captured that moment. But the leadership ultimately comes from the voters. And when I knocked on over 5,000 doors in my campaign, and I stopped counting at 5,000 doors, I found people were deeply thoughtful about the challenges of the day. They were deeply caring about their community, and they were abysmally ignorant about their local government. And that disjunction, I think, is where the leadership has to come from. We have to re-engage people in caring about their government. Democracy is not something that's guaranteed. In fact, in human history, it's an ephemeral little fragile blip. The vast majority of human history, we lived in tribes, and then we got bigger than tribes. We had priests and generals and emperors. Actual self-government is a rare phenomenon in human history, and it is based not on incredibly enlightened statespeople who guide us through challenges. When we get them, we're incredibly lucky. We've had people like Abraham Lincoln, and emerge, but we've also to say, well, where's the next Abraham Lincoln? I think we may be waiting a long, long time. Instead, I think we have to be, and your podcast is, sort of trying to build that. Let's get people, first of all, informed. Second of all, uh, activated or engaged, and then activated to actually do something. And the do something is not necessarily go to the next planning commission meeting or to volunteer for a political campaign. It may be volunteering at your local homeless shelter. It may be bringing a topic about public education to your church, right? I mean, there are ways in which people can contribute to a healthy civic society and civil discourse without necessarily becoming political junkies or having to run for office. But that's everyone's responsibility. We care a lot about our rights in this society. We need to be caring about our responsibilities, not only for ourselves, but for future generations.
I think that's really inspiring for me, and I'm sure will be inspiring for a lot of other people. And one of the things that I find so refreshing in speaking to you and thinking about your career as well is you've been city government, local government for, like you were saying, nearly 40
Forever.
years for forever. And you've, at almost every stage, you can look back and track some of the issues you were advocating for. You've always been on the cutting edge, open to innovation, open to thinking in a different way about how cities operate and run. What are the lessons after nearly 40 years of working in local government about, how do you get people to think differently?
Two things. One is my secret advantage has always been not that I was smarter than other people, because that's literally not true. I've gained enormously from people who are smarter than me, both as colleagues and as role models and inspirations. Um, but I deeply believe in this idea that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So most of my colleagues in local government, whether elected or staff, focus on local government, and they're expert in the realm of local government. I've always been Catholic, small c in my taste. I'm also a Catholic in my faith, but Catholic in the sense of broad-minded and universal. I pay attention to what's going on in sports, what's going on in entertainment, what's going on in academia, what's going on in the media, what's going on particularly in business in the private sector, not just here in this country, but all over the world, because what's happening there will eventually shape what's happening in local government. For example, I used to carry around a Blockbuster card and say, remember going to Blockbuster? And of course, people, yeah, of course I went to Blockbuster. Everyone went to Blockbuster. It was the way you got movies, unless you went to the theater, and it brought movies in people's homes. And um, they were the best in the world at the business they thought they were in. They thought they were in the video rental business, and they were the best in the world at renting videos. Netflix knew that they were in the content delivery business. And so they wiped out um, Blockbuster because Blockbuster made the same mistake that travel agents made, that newspapers made, that many the new encyclopedias made, is they thought they were, newspapers thought they were in the business of providing news and on paper, and it turned out that people get their news in other ways. Travel agents thought they were in the business of helping people travel by booking their hotels and their airlines, and now people book their hotels and their airlines by themselves and put travel agents out of business. You can go on and on. My point is that if you pay attention to what's going on in the rest of the world, it eventually comes over to affect local government. And I think the myopia is always that well, local government's special because of course people are always going to need a fire department. They're always going to need public libraries. They're always that not true, right? Out of the 10,000 years of urban history, public libraries and fire departments are incredibly new innovations that were created for the exact reason of dealing with a burgeoning industrial society, and they were solutions to problems of 100 and 150 years ago, and they're not necessarily solutions to the problems of the next 30, 50 years, or maybe even the next 6 months in some cases. The other lesson, though, besides just paying attention to things beyond local government, the other lesson I think that's important is to understand the dynamism of the world we live in. Steve Wesley said this. I don't think it's original with him, but it's where I heard it. He said, "This is the fastest that change has happened in human history." You look at how far China has come in 100 years. You look at what the smartphone has done to our lives, completely upended how we date, how we choose restaurants, how we pay our bills, on and on. Um, this is the fastest that change has been occurring in human history. 300,000 years of Homo sapiens, 10,000 years since the Neolithic Revolution. It's the speed is mind numbing. And what Wesley said, and we're living through it, is it's never been this, it's never going to be this slow again, right? That the pace is continuing to accelerate. And so my preoccupation, my obsession, whatever God gives me in the way of breath and ability over the next days, weeks, months, years, is devoted to safeguarding the timeless things that are important: um, community, democracy, sustainability, and adapting to these titanic dynamic changes so we can protect community, we can protect democracy, we can protect sustainability, um, by changing and adapting to changing times, and keeping these eternal basic values and assets that make life worth living for human beings, without which I think we'll live very lonely and miserable lives, and to safeguard them in the midst of drastic change. And I think you have to fight for that every single day, and that's what I try to devote my life to doing.
Thinking about how things are changing, how the future is already here, just not evenly distributed. What does the future of local government look like, in your opinion? How is it shifting after a career spent seeing it evolve?
I think it involves much more partnership. We there was a whole generation of public-private partnerships, and there's some values to that. One of the first votes I cast, consequential as a young left-wing council member, was to privatize the golf course in Pasadena, and some of my allies were appalled. Why would you do that? And we were badly managing a golf course and losing $250,000, and by by having somebody who was more competent at running a golf course, we made $750,000. So it gives $1 million we could actually devote to parks and libraries and other things that I wanted to invest in. So I'm not ideologically driven. I used to have on my wall in uh, in my office in Santa Monica a quote in Chinese from Deng Xiaoping. He said, "I don't care if the cat is black or white. What I care about is does it catch mice, right?" And so I think I continue to be a progressive. I continue to believe fervently in that the role of government and the public sector is to particularly safeguard the most vulnerable in our society, and that's under increasing threat as our society becomes more unequal in its distribution of wealth. But for all that, what I'm interested in is what works, and and what works is not necessarily on the left or the right or the middle. And often those labels are irrelevant to what works. Fiorello LaGuardia, the great mayor of New York, famously said, "There's no Republican or Democratic way of picking up the garbage." Right? So, in that sense, the future of local government, I think, is not public-private partnerships. That's an aspect. I think we've milked that for about as far as it's going to go, and but I think it's public partnership. It's actually partnering with the citizens of our community. I just was reminded of this. Um, when I was on the council the first time, there was a frightening incident that happened in one of our parks, which was surrounded on four sides by residents. And what happened was there was a holdup of a nanny and some of her charges, and it was at gunpoint. And of course, the neighborhood just freaked out. And part of the reason that happened was we had an old building that had been damaged by fire that the city had not gotten around to demolishing. And so people said, "Well, let's demolish this building so that we can see into the park better." I said, "Absolutely." I went to I was versed in by this time in city finances. I went to the city manager. Let's get it in the capital program. Yes, we're going to use the capital program. And then I came back to the neighborhood and said, "It's in the capital program. Your council member's delivered for you." And they said, "Well, when will it actually get done?" Well, of course, we have to, do the RFP, and we have to let out the contract, and on and on. And we're like, it'd probably be a year. And they said, "Here, we want this done now." And so I went to the city manager and I said, "Can you don't ask the attorneys, just can you lend us a truck and some saws and crowbars and shovels?" And surprisingly, he said, "Sure." And so one Saturday, a truck showed up and the neighbors gathered and we tore down this building. It took us actually two Saturdays. But then the neighborhood's like, this is now our park. Our literally our blood, sweat, and tears are invested in this. Um, we treat government now like a vending machine, right? You put your money into this mysterious machinery, and then you expect it to deliver you Coke or a bag of potato chips or a hot burrito or whatever. And we have no idea how it works, and we're always pissed off that we put money in and we don't get what we want, or the burrito comes out cold, or the Coke turns out to be Diet 7 Up, and we asked for a potato chip and nothing came out. And when we're dissatisfied with a vending machine, we shake it, we kick it. And that's what's happening with government. People are frustrated. I'm putting money in and I'm not getting what I want. I put billions in and we're not solving homelessness. And I once made this analogy in a rural audience, and one of the guy in the back said, "Up here, we shoot it." And that's happening. It's happening not just here in California and the country, around the world. People are dissatisfied because they don't understand this complicated black box that's supposed to deliver what they want. There's an earlier tradition in America from the frontier called the barn raising, right? Where a family could not on its own build a barn to keep its animals warm in the winter and store their hay over the winter. And it required on the whole community kind of coming together and everybody having a role. Somebody fried the chicken. Somebody said a prayer. Somebody took care of the kids. Some people, the brawnier ones, actually did the heavy lifting. The older ones knew how to, design and cut the thing and make it all work. And then everybody had some sense of ownership, just as in our barn de-raising at the park. I think the future of local government is engaging people not just in knowing better who to pick to vote, but rather to actually be involved in some way. That's difficult at the scale of 4 million, but Mayor Bass is actually trying to pull this off. She's in the face of crippling cuts to city services, she's asking people to come out and help clean up their neighborhoods. I think it's a little tone deaf because it's being framed as let's get ready for the Olympics. But if that appeals to people, great. But we actually need to roll up our sleeves and make local government local again and rebuild the sense of community that these are our communities and we need to work together to improve them.
My family has some Pennsylvania Dutch heritage, and so I grew up under a photo of a barn raising in one of our hallways. That popped into mind as you were describing tearing down that building. So I love that analogy. And then just to end, the last question, I think that alone, what you just described, is a very inspiring vision of how the state can go forward. But what gives you hope for the future of California?
Well, Pope Francis, who just left us, said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, if you look at history, there's no basis for optimism, right? Things don't always turn out well. In fact, sometimes they turn out horrifically for extended periods of time. But if you also look at history, at the tremendous um, resilience of human beings, the heroism of human beings, there's always a basis for hope, right? So I'm not particularly optimistic about Southern California right at this moment, or our country for that matter, but I'm deeply hopeful. And what gives me the most hope, there are a lot of things that I see as positive, but the thing that gives me most hope is young elected officials like Kenneth Mejia, my boss, like Sasha Renee Perez, our new state senator, like Isaac Bryant here in South LA, like Alex Lee up in the Bay Area. Folks who are idealistic, but also, I think, deeply committed to actually accomplishing, making the world work better. You know, like me when I was 29, they have a few things to learn. Who doesn't? I'm still learning at 71. But the fact that A, they've put themselves out there to run, and B, they have triumphed over big money and special interest and the machine of kind of permanent government, I think gives me a great deal of hope. And I don't think we're going to be rescued by elected officials, or as we call them, politicians. But we absolutely need folks who can bring enlightened leadership to our public institutions, and they won't, like me, they won't always make everyone happy. They will make their own mistakes. I used to say as a city manager that if I hit 350, 1 out of 3, I would go to the city manager Hall of Fame, because that's really a good batting average. Um, but that's what gives me hope, is that the people are willing to elect fresh faces and young voices. And those fresh faces and young voices, I think, have the potential to do remarkable things. And I'm doing everything I can to support them. And in Kenneth's case, he's given me the honor of working. I say for him; he always corrects me to say with him, um, and to provide hopefully some value of experience. But also, I was inspired. I would not have run for city council if I had not seen this spark. Because when you're elected at 29, people, before you even take office, people go, "Well, you can run for next," right? Because certainly wouldn't be satisfied with running for city council. Next assembly, and then state senate, and then Congress, and pretty soon you begin to hear, "Hail to the chief" in your ears.
Yeah.
Um, and then after I left office, it's like, "Well, you ever run again? I mean, you had a promising career." And my answer always was, no, I would not run for Rick Cole. That has no interest in me. I got plaques on my wall. My obituary, is going to say I was mayor of my hometown. But if I felt part of a movement and I could contribute my experience to a movement, I do feel that there's an incipient movement. And yes, it's young progressives, But it's not just young progressives. It's young people who are questioning the status quo, questioning the machine, questioning the way things have always been done. And I think that's very hopeful.
Well, it's a great note to end on, Rick. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate your 40 years of public service. I'm grateful to have people like you in our controller's office, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Jarrett, thank you for this project. I hope it flourishes.
Thank you. Well, with the help of guests like you, hopefully it will. Yeah. Thanks, Rick. Take care.